You've done the hard work. You've faced your shadow, healed those deep wounds, and now, you're just sitting there, feeling empty. No drive, no spark, no motivation. The worst part? You can't even explain why. You should feel better, right? But instead, you're wondering if you broke something inside yourself. What if this isn't a failure? What if this quiet, this stillness, is actually your soul hitting pause? There's something no one tells you about shadow work, something Shi Heng Yi understood but didn't always spell out. When you dig deep into your unconscious, when you pull up all that buried shame, unmet needs, and childhood wounds, you don't just feel healed, you feel different. Like, fundamentally, unsettlingly different. Shi Heng Yi once said, "The collapse of the false self is often mistaken for despair." He got something most modern self-help misses. When you do deep inner work, when you face your shadow and bring those rejected parts of yourself back home, your whole motivational system doesn't just shift, it falls apart. And that's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Think about it. For years, maybe your whole life, you've been driven by stuff you didn't even see clearly. The need to be loved. The fear of being left behind. The urge to prove you're enough. Those weren't choices, they were survival mechanisms, running in the background, keeping you moving, productive, busy. But shadow work doesn't just patch up those wounds, it exposes the whole system. You start to see how much of your hustle was just fear dressed up as ambition, how much of your drive was about dodging pain, not chasing joy. When that system shuts down, when those unconscious forces stop pushing you, it's not just that you lose motivation, you lose the only reasons you ever had to be motivated. This is what Shi Heng Yi called the necessary pause before rebirth. But no one warns you how quiet it feels in that in-between space, between who you were and who you're becoming. Let me tell you about Helen, not her real name, but her story's 100% real. Helen spent 2 years in intense therapy after a brutal breakup brought up patterns she'd carried since she was a kid. She did the work, EMDR, inner child healing, parts work, shadow integration. She faced it all. By the end, she was genuinely healed. The anxiety that had fueled her for years? Gone. The need to please everyone? Dissolved. The fear of being alone? It turned into a kind of self-companionship she'd never known. But when she went back to her marketing career, something felt off. Not bad, just empty. The campaigns that used to light her up felt pointless. Client meetings that once got her buzzing now left her hollow. The promotions she'd chased for years? They felt like distractions from something she couldn't quite name. She told me, "I used to wake up with this fire in my belly. Even if it was anxiety, even if it was fear, it was something. Now I wake up and feel nothing. Like I'm waiting for a signal that's not coming." This is what Shi Heng Yi called the void phase, the necessary stillness. It's like the blackening stage in ancient alchemy, the death of the old before anything new can grow. But here's where it gets tricky. Our culture tells us healing should feel good, growth should be steady, progress should be trackable. We expect shadow work to be like popping a pill. You feel bad, you do the work, you feel better. But shadow work? It's more like surgery. The operation might go perfectly, but the recovery? It's long, it's weird, and it's nothing like you expected. So, you're in this void, this weird, quiet space where nothing feels the same. The things that used to light you up, career goals, relationships, hobbies, suddenly feel like they belong to someone else. You might be thinking, is this depression? Did I mess something up by doing all this inner work? But here's the thing, this isn't depression in the clinical sense. You're not hopeless or worthless. You're not unable to function. You're just not driven by the same old carrots and sticks anymore. And without those familiar pushes and pulls, you're not sure how to move forward. Shi Heng Yi saw this as a sign your psyche is reorganizing itself. Your ego, the part of you that's been running the show, chasing validation, avoiding pain, is no longer in charge. But the deeper, more authentic part of you, what he called the true self, hasn't fully stepped up yet. You're in this liminal space, this in-between, where the old you is gone, but the new you is still forming. Take a second and breathe. Is this what you've been carrying? This nagging sense that you should be more motivated, more driven, more alive than you feel right now? The truth is, your psyche is protecting you. It's refusing to let you fall back into motivations that were never really yours. It's holding space for something new, but that something hasn't shown up yet. This isn't laziness or failure or stagnation, it's your soul hitting pause before the next chapter of your growth. In traditional practices, like the one Shi Heng Yi studied, this void was sacred. Think vision quests, dark nights of the soul, initiation rituals. These cultures' new growth often requires a stretch of emptiness, of not knowing. But we live in a world that's allergic to stillness. We're taught to fix what feels off, to medicate the mystery, to push through the quiet. Shi Heng Yi warned that if you rush this phase, if you force yourself back into action before the transformation's done, you risk building a new life on the same shaky foundations that led you to shadow work in the first place. Here's the game changer, that silence you're feeling. It's not collapse. It's a sacred pause before something new can emerge. Every motivation you've ever had that came from fear, from social pressure, from proving your worth, from dodging pain, it's gone. Not because you're broken, but because you've outgrown it. Your soul's done playing that game. Shi Heng Yi put it beautifully, you are not failing, you are in transition. Let's get real for a second. If you're honest, brutally honest, how much of your old drive came from trying to earn love? How much came from fear of not being enough? How much was just anxiety dressed up as productivity? Shadow work doesn't just heal those wounds, it dismantles the beliefs that kept them alive. You stop believing your worth depends on what you do. You stop thinking love has to be earned. You stop tying your value to how much you produce. And when those beliefs collapse, so does the motivation they fueled. This is what Shi Heng Yi meant by the death of the false self. That false self was the mask you wore to fit in, the role you played to survive. Shadow work strips that mask away, and once you see the gap between who you really are and who you've been pretending to be, you can't unsee it. The problem? Most of your life, your job, your relationships, your goals, was built around that false self. It was all designed to keep that version of you going. So when that version dies, and you haven't yet figured out who you are underneath, you feel stuck. Because real motivation, the kind that lasts, only comes from truth, and that truth is still taking shape. Let me tell you about Nick, a successful architect who spent 3 years working through childhood trauma and attachment wounds. The healing was life-changing, he felt more at peace than ever. But when he went back to designing buildings, managing projects, climbing the corporate ladder, it felt wrong. Like he was wearing someone else's skin. I used to be so driven, he said. 60-hour weeks, 5-year plans, 10-year goals, I knew what I wanted and how to get it. Now, those goals feel like they belong to someone else. He thought he was depressed, even considered medication, wondered if he needed more therapy. But this wasn't depression, it was the natural outcome of deep change. His old motivations, proving his worth, earning approval, avoiding shame, were gone. Shadow work had resolved those fears, but his new motivations, the ones tied to his true self, hadn't surfaced yet. This moment Nick was in, this tipping point, is what Shi Heng Yi described as the shift from compulsion to truth. See, when you're driven by fear, you can push through anything. Fear's a powerful fuel. It'll get you up at 5 a.m., keep you grinding till midnight, make you achieve things you never thought possible. But fear-based motivation has a shelf life. You either burn out, or you heal enough to stop being afraid. And when fear stops driving you, if you don't have something real to replace it, you feel empty. But that emptiness? It's not the problem, it's the solution. It's your psyche clearing out space for something new to take root. If this is hitting home, stick with me, because this next part might feel like looking in a mirror. Shi Heng Yi believed the true self, the deeper, more authentic part of you, doesn't shout. It doesn't create drama or urgency to get your attention. It whispers. It nudges. It invites. But if your life's full of noise, if you're always chasing external validation or running from internal fears, you can't hear that whisper. That's why this void, this silence, is so sacred. It's your soul creating the conditions for you to finally hear what it's been trying to say all along. Here's what happens when you stop fighting the quiet and start listening. When new motivation shows up, it's nothing like the old stuff. It's not anxious. It's not frantic. It's not about proving anything or avoiding pain. It's calm. It's steady. It's unshakable. It's like the difference between a fluorescent bulb and sunlight. One keeps you going, but the other actually nourishes you. Shi Heng Yi called this the emergence of the true self, not the ego that craves approval or competes for status, but the deeper part of you that's already whole, already enough, already connected to something bigger. Let's go back to Nick, the architect. After nearly a year of feeling unmotivated, questioning everything, wondering if he'd broken himself with all that inner work, something shifted. It wasn't a big, cinematic moment. No light bulbs, no lightning bolts. It was slow, like a sunrise you don't notice until the world's suddenly bright. He started taking long walks, no phone, no agenda. Not to be productive, not to network, just to move, to be outside, to exist. One day, he noticed an old, abandoned building he'd passed 1,000 times without really seeing. Something about it, the way it stood, its structure, its quiet dignity despite being forgotten, spoke to him. It wasn't just a building, it felt like it had a story, a presence. Instead of brushing it off or turning it into a career move, Nick just sat with it. He started visiting the building regularly, sketching, not blueprints or renovation plans, but impressions, feelings, what the building seemed to want to become. This wasn't about goals or money or impressing anyone. It was about curiosity, beauty, a sense of rightness he couldn't explain but didn't need to. He spent weeks drawing, sitting, being present with this structure no one else seemed to care about. Slowly, an idea started to form, not a business plan, not a strategy, but a vision. A possibility that felt more real than anything he'd worked on in years. That curiosity led to conversations with the building's owner, which led to more conversations, which led to a restoration project unlike anything Nick had done before. It honored the building's history while making space for new life, involved the community in ways he hadn't expected, and felt less like forcing his ideas and more like collaborating with the building's essence. This project sparked a new direction in his career, one that fit who he was becoming, not who he'd been. But here's the key, none of this would have happened if he'd forced his old motivation back. If he'd ignored the silence and gone back to his old grind, he would have missed that building's whisper. He'd still be designing spaces that looked great but felt empty, successful but starving inside. The true self doesn't demand your attention, it offers invitations. It doesn't create urgency, it creates resonance. When you start hearing that quiet hum, motivation stops being about fighting resistance and starts being about following what feels true. You create because something inside you needs to come out, not because you're chasing views or validation. You work because the work calls to you, not because you're proving your worth. You love because connection feels natural, not because you're scared of being alone. This shift from chasing to responding, from forcing to flowing, is what Shi Heng Yi meant by living in alignment with your true self. It's not about escaping reality or chasing some fantasy, it's about connecting to the deeper currents of your life, the patterns and synchronicities that show how your personal journey fits into something bigger. When you're motivated by your true self, work becomes an act of devotion, not obligation. Relationships become conscious choices, not unconscious needs. Creativity becomes expression, not performance. Rest becomes nourishment, not laziness. Boundaries become self-care, not selfishness. And here's the wild part, this quieter, truer motivation often gets you further than the frantic energy you used to run on. Why? Because it's sustainable. It's rooted in who you are, not who you think you should be. It comes from fullness, not lack, from love, not fear. Here's a little exercise to help you tap into this. Grab a piece of paper and try this journaling prompt. It's simple, but it can reveal a lot. Write down 3 things you feel like you should be motivated about right now, things you think you ought to want, ought to chase, ought to care about. Maybe it's a promotion, a fitness goal, or keeping up with a certain social circle. Then ask yourself, where's this should coming from? Whose voice is it? Who'd be disappointed if I let this go? What am I afraid will happen if I don't pursue it? What am I trying to prove? Be honest. Next, write down 3 things you're drawn to, even if they don't make sense. Things that spark curiosity, wonder, or peace. Things that make you feel more alive, more present, more you. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to follow this pull without needing to justify it? What would it feel like to trust this without needing to know exactly where it's going? The gap between those 2 lists. That's the difference between motivation driven by fear and motivation rooted in truth. It's the difference between a push that drains you and a pull that fills you up. It's the difference between your wounded ego shouting and your true self whispering. Let's go back to Helen, the marketing exec from earlier. When she did this exercise, she realized her drive in her career was tied to fear, fear of not being enough, fear of letting people down, fear of not measuring up. But buried under all that was a quiet pull toward working with kids. Not because it was noble or impressive or would fix her, but because something in her lit up around children. Something she'd ignored for years while chasing what she thought she was supposed to want. It took Helen 2 years to shift from marketing to becoming an elementary school teacher. 2 years of following curiosity instead of clarity, of trusting the process instead of forcing an outcome, of taking small steps toward what felt true instead of big leaps toward what looked good. Her friends thought she was nuts. Her family worried about the pay cut. Her logical mind had a million reasons to stay put. But her soul? It was singing again, for the first time in decades. That's what happens when you let the true self lead. You don't just find motivation, you find meaning. This isn't about settling for less or giving up on ambition. It's about graduating to a deeper way of living. The silence you're scared of? That's where your true self is waiting to speak. The emptiness you're trying to fill? That space being carved out for something real, something sustainable, something that's actually you. Shi Heng Yi didn't say this journey would be easy. He knew becoming your true self, what he called the path of alignment, meant walking through uncertainty, through quiet, through moments where you're not sure of anything. But he also knew that on the other side of that uncertainty is something solid, something true, not the mirage of a perfect life or job or relationship, but a way of being that doesn't need to be perfect because it's real. When that new motivation starts to show up, you'll get why the silence was necessary. You'll see why the void had to clear out the old before the new could take root. You'll realize losing your old drive wasn't a loss, it was a gift. The gift of finally being free to discover what you're really here for. That's when the real adventure begins, when you start living from truth instead of chasing shadows. So, if you're in this void right now, feeling unmotivated and wondering what's wrong with you, let me offer a different perspective. Maybe nothing's wrong. Maybe something's incredibly right. Maybe your soul is finally strong enough to stop performing. Maybe you're healed enough to tell the difference between what you truly want and what you've been conditioned to chase. Maybe you're integrated enough to wait for real inspiration instead of running on fake urgency. That silence you're sitting in? It's not empty, it's full of potential. It's your psyche holding space for what's next. Listen to it, not with your ears, but with your heart. What's it trying to tell you? What's it protecting you from? What's it preparing you for? Your old life, the one fueled by fear, by the need for approval, by the constant hunger for validation, that life's over. And you know why? Because you ended it. You did the shadow work to break free from those patterns. You faced the parts of yourself you used to run from, specifically so you wouldn't have to live that way anymore. This isn't the end of your healing journey, it's the start of your authentic life. This is where things get real. The true self you're stepping into doesn't need motivation the way your old self did. It doesn't need to be pushed or prodded or bribed. It needs recognition. It needs trust. It needs you to stop trying so hard to be someone else and start noticing who you already are. Shi Heng Yi put it this way: the true self doesn't demand effort, it invites presence. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're exactly where you need to be for the next phase of your growth to begin. And when it does, when that quiet hum of real motivation starts to rise, you'll get why the void was so necessary. You'll see why your psyche had to clear out the old noise before it could let in the new music. Losing your old drive wasn't something to fix, it was something to receive. It was the gift of freedom to figure out what you're really here for. Let's circle back to Nick for a second. That restoration project he stumbled into? It wasn't just a new job, it was a new way of being. He didn't force it or chase it or make it happen through sheer willpower. He followed a thread of curiosity, a pull that felt true, even if it didn't make sense at first. That's what real motivation looks like. It's not about grinding or hustling, it's about responding to what resonates. It's about showing up for what calls you, even when it's quiet, even when it's small, even when it doesn't come with a 5-year plan or a guarantee. And Helen? Her shift to teaching wasn't just a career change, it was a homecoming. She didn't leap into it because it looked good or solved all her problems. She moved toward it because it felt like her. Because it woke something up in her that had been asleep for years. That's what happens when you let the true self guide you. You don't just find a new goal, you find a new you. A you that doesn't need to prove anything, because it's already enough. A you that doesn't need to perform, because it's already whole. This is what Shi Heng Yi meant when he talked about living in harmony with your deeper essence. It's not about achieving more or being better or fixing yourself. It's about aligning with what's true. When you do that, motivation isn't something you have to chase, it's something that flows through you. You create because you can't not create. You connect because connection feels natural. You work because the work feels like an extension of who you are. And when you live this way, the things you do don't just succeed, they matter. They nourish you. They last. If you're feeling stuck in the void, I want you to try something. Just for today, stop trying to fix it. Stop trying to force the old motivation back. Instead, ask yourself, what's one small thing that feels true right now? Maybe it's going for a walk with no goal. Maybe it's doodling in a notebook. Maybe it's sitting quietly with a cup of coffee and letting your mind wander. Whatever it is, follow it. Not because it'll lead to some big outcome, but because it feels right in this moment. That's how the true self speaks, through small, quiet invitations. Trust them. They're leading you somewhere real. So, here we are. You're in this strange, quiet space, and maybe you're starting to see it's not a dead end, it's a doorway. The void you've been wrestling with? It's not here to stop you, it's here to set you free. Shi Heng Yi understood this better than most: the silence, the emptiness, the loss of your old drive, it's all part of the process of becoming who you're meant to be. This isn't about fixing yourself or getting back to who you were. It's about discovering who you are now, after all the shadow work, after all the healing, after letting go of the masks you used to wear. The motivation that's coming, the one that's slowly taking shape, isn't going to burn you out or leave you empty. It's going to feel like coming home. This new kind of motivation, the kind that comes from your true self, doesn't roar, it hums. It doesn't push you to prove anything, it pulls you toward what feels true. You'll write because you have something to say, not because you need the likes. You'll create because it's alive in you, not because you're chasing recognition. You'll work because the work feels like it's part of you, not because it's a way to earn your worth. Shi Heng Yi called this living in alignment, a life where your actions flow from your essence, not from your fears. And the paradox? This quieter, truer way of moving through the world often leads to bigger, more meaningful results than the frantic hustle ever did. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're living truer. If you're in the void right now, I want you to hear this: you're not failing. You're not stuck. You're in the sacred in-between, the space where your old self dissolves and your true self begins to emerge. Trust it. Don't rush it. Don't try to fill the silence with noise just to feel something familiar. Let it be. Listen to what it's teaching you. That quiet pull, that gentle curiosity, that small spark of what feels right, those are the breadcrumbs leading you to your next chapter. Follow them, even if they don't make sense yet. Even if they don't look like a plan. Even if they scare you a little because they're so different from what you've known. Let's wrap this up with a final thought. The life you've been living, the one driven by fear, by shoulds, by the need to prove yourself, that life ended because you did the work to end it. You faced your shadow so you could stop running from it. Now, you're at the edge of something new, something real. The adventure isn't in going back to who you were, it's in stepping into who you're becoming. Shi Heng Yi said it best: the path to truth is through the silence. That silence you're feeling? It's not the end of your story, it's the comma. It's the pause before the life you're meant to live begins. And that life? It's worth waiting for. If this resonates, if it's helped you make sense of the void you're in, drop a comment below. Share your story. What's it been like for you in this in-between? Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to know they're not alone. And if you want to keep diving into these deeper layers of growth and self-discovery, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started on this journey of what it really means to become who you are. The void isn't your ending, it's the space where your real story begins. Stay with it. You're closer than you think.